Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about KZ-ZEX. And for those of you following along, the ZEX is their hybrid 1DD, 1 magnetostatic, electrostatic, whichever you want to call it. KZ calls it an electrostat. Most people call it a magnetostatic, but they do refer to it as an electrostatic, so we'll use that for now, I guess. So first, I want to thank the KZ store. This is their official store, not the official store on AliExpress, but directly from KZ. And if you look on their store today, it's $24.99. They actually have a discount code called ZEX, which will get you about 5% off of that. So I do want to thank them for sending this one out to me. So before we begin, let's take a quick look at what this guy looks like up close and personal. And I have to admit, it's kind of a very nice looking KZ compared to some of the recent ones, and even the CCA NRA, which I think this one, I definitely prefer this faceplate compared to the NRA, but the NRA is not that bad. And if we look right there, you can almost see the dynamic driver, and the electrostatic, magnetostatic is kind of right there, right on the bottom of it. So not a whole lot of things on the shell. It's pretty clean, nice black tinted shell. Can't see too much. This is the newer style KZ. I call it the flat cable. It's not quite round at all. It's got these two side-by-side cores, and it basically feels flat, kind of more like a ribbon cable with a 90-degree 3.5. So kind of a nice little package for a budget set like the ZEX. The packaging itself, pretty much standard KZ. So again, thank those guys for sending this one to me. So where to begin on this one? And I'll have to admit, I have mixed feelings on this one. I think as a KZ fan, you should go and buy it just to try it. If you haven't purchased the NRA, you should buy the ZEX. You should buy one of them just to get a feel for where KZ was going with this kind of design and this hybrid driver configuration. On the other hand, is it my favorite KZ model? Probably not. Is it the best treble? Maybe, probably not for me. For other people, possibly. Is it, the one KZ that's not over boosted with a metallic BA? Probably. But for me, it lacks a bit of fun. And let's take a quick peek at the graph here, and maybe we'll see where the fun went. So KZ-ZEX, the first thing you notice at the base level compared to maybe KZ's house sound, which is, probably up closer to where the EDX Pro is. So the ZEX is quite a bit lower, and it kind of rolls off towards the end, so there's definitely not as much rumble as you'd get in other KZ models. And it's got this kind of gentle slope in, whereas the EDX Pro and the EDX started at a much higher level and, bring a little warmth into the mids, a little bleeding. This one, not as much energy. It does boost this, compared to KZ's house sound, this whole 200 to maybe 800 is a little more elevated than it usually is on a KZ house signature. That does affect the sound, and I do think this whole midsection is a little bit different than any other KZ set, and we'll kind of get to that in a bit. But so typical KZ house sound, big V sound, so you can see the big boosted bass here, and the upper range tends to be a little higher as well, and you can actually see that in the EDX, where it's this level here, an elevated 2K, and it even continues being a little more elevated through most of the whole upper treble. So ZEX, much lower bass, so less of a boost on the bass, and even on the treble, I think it actually sounds a little lower than what's actually shown here. They're not that close. It's I call it mid-centric, and a lot of the energy is here, not so much here, and not so much here. And for me, KZ fun is, up here. It's that V shape. It's why I listen to KZ models. So like I said, on one hand, it's something to try. On the other hand, it's not like a traditional KZ model. And if you're looking for that big V, it's not there. It's something different. It's something to try. And I do encourage other KZ fans to pick one up, either one of the models, because they're both very similar. So what I sort of noticed right away with the ZEX is, where's the fun? So you lose that V shape. It's very much a more mid-centric sound, and a song that usually sounds quite good on a KZ model, Molly Cruz, Looks That Kill. It just sounds a bit unengaging to me. And, in some respects, the vocals sound maybe a little closer in, and that's going to sound better to some people, so you don't have as much of that V-shaped recessed vocals. But the rest of it, the guitars and the drums, sort of unengaging, and they're there, but not really grabbing your attention. So, as I alluded to, it's somewhat mid-centric, and it's really hard to get the words right on this one, but on certain tracks, it really is very focused on the vocals and the midsection, and the bass kind of falls away and rolls off, and the treble never really rose to the occasion. It's at a lower level anyway. So there's just some tracks that you end up with this very mid-centric sound, and I would call it a slight V, mostly because the bass isn't really boosted all that much, and the treble isn't that either, but it sounds like there's a little boost right in the middle, that hump in the middle. And third, the stage height. There's no KZ stage height, and for those of you familiar with KZ models and stages, they tend to use like a visor level or baseball hat level stage. It's sort of where you see that the brim of your hat, you look up, and that's about where the vocals are on a KZ. And it's not consistent on every model, but a lot of models all have vocals about the same height, and I call it the visor level because it's sort of just when you look at the top of the lid of your hat, that's about where the vocals should be on a KZ. And this one, pretty much dead center where your eyes are. There's not really any height to it, and so these three characteristics are a little bit different than your traditional KZ model, and they're certainly going to appeal to some people, and some other people not as much. So Coherent, and that's another thing that's kind of odd. So KZ went on somewhat of a Coherent streak with the EDX models and even EDX Pro. A single DD, it's a lot easier to be coherent. You don't have a hybrid system, you don't have a BA to change the tonality at all. And I think with this one, I think it's the little bump in the mids, and the way the bass falls off, and the way the treble kind of falls off, and it's not full there. There's some peaks there. The whole thing doesn't really sound as coherent as just the single DD. But I think that's my 2 cents on it. I think other people may disagree with that, but to me, it comes off just a little less coherent than something like the EDX or the EDX Pro, which is just one driver, end to end. It sounds pretty much the same. This one, it's really hard to deal with some of the bass level and then some of the treble level, and then have the mids really in your face. So yeah, so that's that. So the sound, like, I call it a shallow W. It's not really a V at all. I'm not sure what to really call that one, but it's got this relaxed bass and treble. And you notice it on like a high energy sound like Scooter's God Save the Rave, which is from his last CD. It's very vocal centric, and almost no other IEM that I've listened to it sounds that vocal centric. It's kind of odd. Again, it goes back to where's the fun. It loses a bit of fun. And for vocal-centric tracks, that's fine. This one isn't necessarily EDM, dance, electronic, not necessarily vocal-centric. But yeah, I will say in general, it's vocal-centric, mid-centric, instead of that KZ, big V-shaped fun sound. And we could probably see it on something else as well. Let's see. So one of my recent KZ models that I've been listening to, especially on the weekends for some high energy outdoor music, the KZ VX10 10 drivers TWS, and it's got a very classic, almost Harman, very close to Harman, elevated bass, drops down, clean out the mids a little bit, and then rise for some gain, and then follow, a nice extended treble all the way across. And that's not, it's probably even closer to Harman than a typical KZ house sound is. But when you look at the level of ZEX and the bass level is kind of down here, there's just not a whole lot of energy happening at these ends compared to the VX10, which is a great gym set, a great outdoor set to listen to. You don't have to boost the volume a whole lot because you get a big boost on either end, and the ZEX isn't quite like that. If you boost the volume, you really end up with something that sounds quite mid-centric, and vocals not so much either end. So bass. So for a KZ, like I said, this bass level is a bit lower than what they're traditionally put out, especially recently, compared to EDX Pro, ZAS. Those were all big bass sets, and ZEX really is a restrained bass level compared to those guys, and there's definitely some sub-bass roll-off. It doesn't have that depth that other KZ models do, and it's noticeable for me anyway. But it still has that KZ fun bass, not quite sharp, not quite super defined. It's got a slower decay and is less detailed, but there's more body to it, and it is funnish. But if you listen to the NRA, I think the NRA actually is a bit different, and I think the decay is different, and there's more definition to it. It's a bit sharper. It was the one bit of the NRA that I really, really liked, and the minute you put on the NRA, you can hear that dynamic driver felt slightly different, and then the ZX came out a bit later, and I think they're a little bit different. But graph-wise, when you look at if we look at my NRA graphed and measured to my ZEX, essentially the only difference is about right here. And is that just a measurement variation, a unit variation? Is that a different driver? I don't know, but mine basically look like the same set. But when you listen to them, I don't know. They're the core of the signatures, pretty much 100%. I said the same thing. I said the same exact words about the NRA, and I didn't really review it for the same reason, because I think it's a bit wonky. It's good for fans, but maybe not necessarily for an everyday carry. So mids, and I think the mids tone is reminiscent of the ZAS. And what I said about the ZAS is it had this dry, it was a big bass set, but the actual vocals themselves didn't have a ton of body to it. They were kind of a little bit dry, a little bit lean. It's an odd combination, but I think the ZEX does something very similar. It's a hair lean and it's clean, but it could really use a little bit more depth to vocals and maybe even a little bit warmth. It doesn't feel real almost. It's not quite as natural as it should be. Sounds okay, just not quite realistic or natural, but not too bad though. It's because you don't have that metallic BA. I think it definitely sounds better than some other previous KZ models, and I think other people are going to agree about that. But when you get down to like a live song like Dito's Hurricanes, that live version, her voice is a little bit recessed and is really missing that being there sound. All the small details, all the resolution, all the dynamics aren't quite there. It sounds okay, but I think not quite there. And then kind of the other side of that is sometimes, especially at higher volumes, it gets very in your face. And Adele's Hello, Ellie Goulding's Love Me Like You Do. These songs start out a little bit slower and it sounds kind of great on the ZEX, sounds fine. And then as the songs pick up, and especially Adele's Hello, the whole thing seems to close in between your ears and right of your eyes, and the stage and her voice being so close and too intimate. you get her voice is pretty much right here in your face, and then the instruments are right behind it, and that kind of puts me off. So some tracks very much felt too claustrophobic, too in your face. There's almost no stage there. The whole thing is right there, your eyeballs, and yeah. And it's not every track. It's definitely some tracks, but it's noticeable enough that it started to annoy me on some tracks, and just becomes very hard to listen to. It's not enjoyable when you know that track should sound better if it was just pushed back a little bit more, like other tracks that you listen to on the ZEX. So, like I said, the treble is quite relaxed. It doesn't have that BA metallic timbre. The magnetostat actually is taking over the part of very high treble, the very upper treble. So it's very hard to tell where that bit takes over from where the dynamic driver is. It's not like their BA where the crossover point is much lower. I think the magnetostat is actually much higher. But so no metallic timbre, but it still has the extension and very much a less fatiguing, more natural listen compared to many other KZ models with a BA. For those of you who are, very annoyed by KZ's metallic BAs, especially the older ones, this will sound quite different. And this one is probably the KZ model that you should pick up simply for that reason. It'll be much less fatiguing, less annoying on your ears. So the stage, like I said, is very much in your head, and it doesn't have enough height or any height, and it can be too intimate. In general, I think that's the downfall. For those people who are very sensitive to the stage, this one is going to go between okay and very annoying, and it just depends on what track you're listening to and how that goes. But for the most part, I ran across enough songs where I found it annoying, and the ZEX is probably ends up being, again, why I said probably not my favorite KZ, not the best KZ for me. Other people who are probably treble, it's definitely more in line for people like me. I'm okay with a bigger V-shaped sound if the stage is better, like the VX10. On this one, it just kind of closes in between my eyeballs and becomes very fatiguing. And it's not a quite long listening session like other KZ models are for me. So that is it. That is my take on the ZEX. And for those of you following along, the ZEX Pro will be out soon. And I'll get my hands on that one. And I think that one will probably fit me better than the ZEX does. But we'll give it a shot. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.